Mhm. You should, as soon as I start talking, it goes live. Happy Friday, Augustonians. Welcome back to Lit Friday. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Jessica Lene. I host and curate the series. Lit Friday is a virtual program held on the final Friday of each month, and we feature writers, artists, and thinkers from the African diaspora. Before we introduce our guest, the brilliant poet Ama Codjoe, let's synchronize our calendars for upcoming events. On August 17th, we have our event Intermission, the Artful Happy Hour series at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also remember, the Black Bottom Film Festival submission window is still open. Send us your incredible work. The deadline is February 16th, 2024. On August 19th, actor Malik Yoba will share his autobiographical theatrical work, Harlem to Hollywood, at the Tabernacle on Martha's Vineyard. Please secure your tickets before they sell out. And on August 25th, Lit Friday welcomes the poet and performer Brad Walrand to a conversation about his poetry collection, Everywhere Alien. So make sure you're with us on August 25th, also at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before I introduce our guest again, just a heads up that we may touch on adult themes in our conversation tonight. We're always in good taste, but never at the sacrifice of honesty and good conversation. Our incredible Ama Codjoe is the author of Bluest Nude and Blood of the Air, winner of the Drinking Gourd Chapbook Poetry Prize. She has been awarded support from Cave Canem, Robert Rauschenberg, the Saltonstall Foundations, as well as from Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop, Hawthornden, Hedgebrook, Yaddo, and MacDowell. Her recent poems have appeared in the New York Review of Books, The New Republic, the Best American Poetry series, and elsewhere. Among other honors, Codjoe has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council, New York Foundation of the Arts, and the Jerome Foundation. Thank you for spending time with us, Ama. I cannot wait to hear you read from the Bluest Nude.
Thank you, Jess. I'm super excited to be here, even though I'm not in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. It's a very close cousin to Pittsburgh, and August Wilson is definitely, I don't know, I mean, he's a literary genius, but he's an important person in my own family literary upbringing. So thanks so much for the invitation. We're gonna start with a few poems before we get into our conversation.
I'm gonna mute myself and go away so everyone can focus on you.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna read 3 poems, and the first one is, like a lot of the poems in Bluest Nude, an ekphrastic poem, so a poem that's in conversation with art. In this case, it's an assemblage piece by the artist Betty Starr, and she made this piece with a lot of different kind of Aunt Jemima, mammy figures in it, and she kind of placed in Aunt Jemima's hand like a rifle and a hand grenade, and the kind of thrust of the piece was to say the liberation of Aunt Jemima, to say I'm liberating this figure, and I'm going to liberate this figure with the tools of a revolutionary. And I wanted to kind of also add to this a advocacy for softness, for sensuality, for sexual pleasure, for desire, that I use Aunt Jemima's voice in the poem to express some of those things. So, poem after Betty Starr's The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, as spoken by Aunt Jemima. What if, Betty, instead of a rifle or hand grenade, what if after the loaded gun that takes 2 hands to fire, I lay down the splintered broom and the steel so cold it wets my cheek. What if I unclench the valleys of my fist and lay down the wailing baby? Gonna burn the moon in a cast iron skillet. Gonna climb men who, when they see my face, turn into stony mountains. Gonna get out of the kitchen. Gonna try on my nakedness like a silk kimono. Gonna find me a lover who eats nothing but pussy. Let the whites of my eyes roll, roll. Gonna clench my toes. Gonna purr beneath my own hand. Gonna take down my hair, try on a crown of crow feathers. Gonna roam the wide aisles of the peach grove, light dripping off branches like syrup, leaves brushing the fuzz of my arms. You dig? Gonna let juice trickle down my chin. Gonna smear the sun like war paint across my chest. Gonna shimmy into a pair of royal blue bell bottoms. Gonna trample the far out thunder clouds, heavy in their lightness. Watch them slink away. Gonna grimace, gonna grin, gonna lay down my sword, pick up the delicate eggs of my fist, gonna jab the face that hovered over mine. It's easy to find the lips, surrounded as they are in menstrual black. Gonna bloody the head of every god, ghost, or swan who has torn into me, pried me open with its beak. Gonna catch my breath in a hunting trap. Gonna lean against the ropes. Gonna break the nose of mythology. Good night, John Boy. Gonna ice my hands in April's stream. Gonna scowl and scream and shepherd my hollering into a green pasture. Gonna mend my annihilations into a white picket fence. Gonna whip a tornado with my scarlet handkerchief. Spin myself dizzy as a purple-lipped drunkard. Gonna lay down by the riverside, sticky and braless in the golden sand. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. A lot of images in the book have to do with mirrors and nakedness. This poem is called Primordial Mirror. I was newly naked, aware of myself as a separate self, distinct from dirt and bone. I had not hands enough, and so finally uncrossed my arms. In trying to examine one body part, I'd lose sight of another. I couldn't imagine what I looked like during the fractured angles of sex. At the river's edge, it was impossible to see all of myself at once. I was beginning to understand nakedness as a feeling. It was a snake, loose and green. It was the snake skin, coiled and discarded. The shedding chained itself like a balloon ribboned to a child's wrist. Morning's bird song reminded me of the sloughing off of skin. The rumored beauty of my husband's first wife never bothered me before. I missed the sensation of being fixed in amber. Then the hair in the comb, fingernail clippings, the red mole on my left breast grown suddenly bigger. I perceived my likeness in everything, the lines on my palm as the veins of a leaf, my mind as a swarm of flies humming over something sugary or dead, my vulnerability as the buck I'd kill, then wrap myself inside. My hair as switchgrass, twine, and nest, a roving cloud, my every limb. I'll close with the last poem in the book. There is a scar near my right eye, no lover ever noticed or kissed, a faint mark, split skin zone. And so, and now, there was never a before, never a time when the wind did not smell of dust or storm or brine or blood. Never an hour when I entered a field of bluebells without trampling at least one flower. And so, and then, On the day I was born, a stampede of horses filled my chest. Astronomers can only guess how the universe formed. The planet is dying. The horses, the mothers, the farmers, the bees. I am the ground, its many grasses and wild clover. My teeth grow yellow, ache, decay. I wash a plate, polishing the moon's face. Both will outlast my brutal hands. And so, in the minutes of after, the moon drips on a silver rack, and the plate floats, cracked with age and outer space. A stray soapsud sparkles, then bursts.
Thank you so much. This is the, oh, I always have this, there we go. So of course, on the front of the cover is a piece of artwork by Simone Lay, right? Beautiful,
Yep.
Wonderful, interdisciplinary artist. So go run out, get your copy of this, read every poem 3 times. That way you can get as much, all of the juice out of it. Don't just read one poem once. It's really, really a really beautifully crafted, well, finely sculpted set of poems. And I really enjoyed it. And the part of it that I enjoyed the most was the open freeness in sex and sexuality throughout the book. And recently, Hortense Spillers had an article where she's asking this question about what happens to Black women's sexuality in conversation. Where does the reticence come from? Where does the shame come from? Where does the hesitancy come from? And so much of the history of how that is framed is out of our control, right? And then we have our own reticences within our communities about speaking openly about those experiences. What helped you traverse this territory in Bluest Nude? And were you reticent on the approach, or were you just like, it's time, I'm ready, this is the subject?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. That question is so good. I mean, it gets at the heart of everything, because part of what I was kind of, I guess, researching and beginning to understand, and mostly through art, was that there's a gap that you're speaking towards, right? Like there's this gap of representations that Black women are making of ourselves in our nakedness. And we can think about that literally first. So what does it mean for us to draw ourselves in our nakedness, in our vulnerability? And like, what are the things that come up when we try to do that, which are like maybe cultural inheritances, forces of oppression, thinking about like shame, thinking about the Black woman figure being misconstrued, misunderstood, misrepresented. But often authored by someone not us, you know? So I was excited to write into that gap, and didn't feel like, I felt nothing but joy in terms of the purpose and the prospect of that work. Yeah.
In my own research, I also noticed that when we do kind of approach writing about our individual Black women's bodies and Black women's bodies in general, when we're thinking about sexuality and sex itself, is we're often trying to describe the ways that it's already framed in history rather than forwarding what we think about it, right? And like, I think Toy Dericote has this amazing short poem about masturbating, right? Like in front of like a small Virgin Mary altar. And it was such a powerful poem for me because it wasn't about negating the assumptions of history. It wasn't about providing evidence that all of the stereotypes about Black women and their sexuality isn't true. It was really about forwarding like a collective freedom through the individualized reclaiming of that experience itself.
Yeah.
And when you say fill a gap, like that's what I see in Bluest Nude. There's this traversing. And you've told us like about the time, like what was the first image that you received that you said, because I figure in your head, you see flashes of images, you see, you know, shapes, forms, colors. What was the first flash of image that you saw that made you fearlessly form this like sculpture of a book that you have?
Yeah. I mean, I love you brought Toy Dercott into this. And like, I mean, the book, although there are poems that were written outside of kind of the momentum of thinking what the project of the book was, the impetus for the book really was Denise Morell's Posing Modernity exhibit, where she's looking at the Black model and just raising questions that I hadn't really thought through, which led me to Lorraine O'Grady and thinking about Olympia's Maid. And in that essay, Lorraine O'Grady talks about how essentially there's a lack of Black nudes in art. And I hadn't ever really critically thought about that. And when she said it, I said, okay, well then what would it look like for me to do what you're saying, which is like, not to start on my own terms, like to not ignore the kinds of things that are outside of me that impact me, but also to not use that as a starting place. Like, so when you're thinking about that Toy Dercott poem, like it's a great example. How does my own lived experience speak to this gap? And how can I center myself as opposed to other narratives about like who I am or what my body is or what my body historically has meant. And it's not to say that those things don't come up, but it's more about like, where do we begin?
And you don't eschew, right? Like all of the risk that's involved, right? And be like a sexually self-possessed, self-represented, self-contained woman, Black woman, right? In the book, the speaker doesn't miss the trials and travails of what it means to be a woman in the world and the sexual violence that's just so enmeshed in our everyday society. It's almost as if it's the bottom text underneath all of the conversations that you have. It's the first way people assume to speak to you on the street when they don't even know you. So you manage to keep this balance of the joy of exploration and the joy of the claim, while also representing those scarier images of the risk and punishments of being a free woman, a free Black woman especially. And I wonder how you manage to strike that balance where you could be honest about the risks, honest about the violences of other people toward the speaker's freedom, without having those risks kind of chomped down on the self-possession and the agency that's present in the text.
Yeah, such a good question. Maybe it's about who I'm writing for that gets to that question kind of in a roundabout way. Like if we think about writing for ourselves, there's something different that comes with that task, as opposed to writing against something. So, I mean, a long, big, historical narrative, let's say. Like, if that was my project, it would be a different book. So knowing that I'm tasking myself with writing into this gap, but also that I'm writing it for myself, means like, I don't know, there's actually less work to do if I just start with that as an imperative. I don't necessarily have to balance or like think about, finding balance if I know that I'm centering my own experiences. And I mean, it's, the human experience, which is of course like vast and complicated and nuanced, right? So it's going to be the highs and the lows. It's going to be solitude and community. It's going to be like violation and harm and brutality. And it's also going to be pleasure and desire and joy.
So I'm going to make like a little bit of like a shift, because I thought a lot. There were moments I put the book down, I would finish reading one poem for the umpteenth time, and I would put it down to think, and I would always, get a taste of like something else, because the book always is, they conjured me into like thinking of images as it's filled with images, and they fast shuttle between one another. So there's this element of like an Ezra Pound kind of influence, or William Carlos Williams, and thinking about the brightness of the images and the quick shuffling of them through cards, and that quick shuffling without losing vibrancy, right? And I think one line that stuck with me was, the water turns field and beast, the tractor of memory. And having this related movement of the water turning to field, and then the tractor coming over this image, and imagining this interaction that's like erasure, but as well cultivating, both at the same time, with just the provocation of a tractor's image. And I wanted to know, and there are ekphrastic poems here, and for those of you who aren't familiar, ekphrastic poetry is in praise of, or a textual translation of, different works of art, any work of art really. So I wanted to know what happens in your head when you're experiencing these transformations in writing, because they happen so richly. Like you said, it's sewn, it's woven and braided together, and very quick without losing its impact, its touch on the reader.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your readership. I feel so honored that you spent time with the poems. I don't know if I can explain well. I mean, I guess I could say just about image making that I mean, this is kind of basic, but I want to make something just a little bit strange, so what we all kind of receive, like we have cliches and habits and all these things, and they could be good habits, they could be things we do really well. Like I love a good ending of a poem, and there's something that's like I have to sometimes push past, which is like a good ending. And I have to kind of be like, well, what else could you do? So with the image, it's like, it's looking outside the window, it's trying to, I guess, find the objects that are imbued with meaning. It's juxtaposition, thinking about how one thing next to another thing makes it slightly different. And there's a pursuit, I guess, to say, yeah, there's a pursuit of an image that is a little strange, that I think is what part of what the poet's job is to find.
It's like
it's strange, but it's familiar too, I think, is the other part.
What do they call that? Like the prestige and magic, where you show your audience the object and then you turn it into something else, and then the magic is when you give it back to them the way that it began. And I think it's one of the like hardest gestures to do seamlessly in writing, and the strange can help. But in that way, wanting to make things a little strange, what does strangeness mean for you, or do for you as a creator, as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I guess it's like this thing of estrangement. Like there's something about, for me, the job of the poem that is about creating a pause. And so if oh gosh, we have so much other input that's happening that's just like going, we're not pausing. We're scrolling. It's background noise. But then there's something about the poem that is arresting. And that maybe it's like something that kind of catches on a branch, like a plastic bag. It sticks there. And I think the strangeness means there's some distance, or there's some estrangement that causes, like, the distance causes a pause. And then, it may resonate or reverberate or get a little stuck before it moves on. And I guess surprising would be another way of putting it. Like, what is something that, I mean, I don't know how I don't even know how I evaluate that in my writing, but just something that is probably 4 versions away from the beginning from the first draft. You know, like it's just not the received thing. It's not the norm. It's not the usual. Like you're saying, that idea of looking out at the water, thinking of the water as calm as a field, thinking of the water as like when it churns as a beast, and then thinking about memory as this like tractor that's moving across time or landscape or seascape. Like that's what I mean by strange.
Absolutely. And so I think what I also sense as a reader is that each poem has within it like an immense amount of concentration. The book has sections, everything is in a place and each part is thought out. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of labor as an artist. And I think that sometimes when people think of poetry, they're like, oh, you wrote that. You like followed a form and then you wrote that, instead of, you know, instead of being able to accept, no, this poem's actually 4 years old and it took me 4 years to edit it. Even when I was a young writer, I was like, I would never take 4 years to, no. You will take 4 years to edit something from the point that because it's not done, it's still baking. And so it's very painstaking. And I wonder how you keep yourself incentivized to bring yourself back to the painstaking aspect of your work as a writer. How do you maintain that commitment? What other activities do you have in your life that help you maintain your commitment to doing that kind of work?
That's so good. I guess I think I would start by saying I'm not one of the kind of writers who does it, who writes every day, who writes poems every day. I don't think I could sustain it. I don't know, but there's something about going away and coming back that is very, very helpful for me. It's helpful in the estrangement, actually. So thinking about like, this is something I wrote, I've been spending all this time worrying over these words. Okay, it's done. It's done. Now I take time away from it and then I look at it again. It's totally strange. It's a strange object. Like, who made that? How'd that happen? You know? And then it's like, okay, let me try to figure out what's here, what's working. Yeah, how can I listen to this again? And it really is leaving and coming back, like over the course of years, where then I have a poem that I feel like is ready.
Don't make it sound like a situationship.
God, no. No.
Well, this is one of the poetry is always one of those tales where it's like a situationship until the poem becomes your soulmate, then everything works out.
That's hilarious. Yeah. But I think the feeding yourself in the meanwhile, for me, a lot of that is about experiencing art. It's about being in community with other people, having time with like people who care about me, reading. Oh my goodness. Yes. Reading, like hugely important to my process. Moving, like just walking around. It's like I like taking very long walks. So it is, I feel like if you can figure it out to have everything on the stove, things that you like, you know, and you can kind of just move from the front burner to the back burner to the side, like that's a good life. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you've shared with us, because you asked me if I had any special requests, and I did. And you read poem after Betty Saar's Liberation of Aunt Jemima. And there's so much movement. It was impossible for me to just, it was like in my mind, the artwork came apart and then the figure of Aunt Jemima started moving, right? Even becoming free from the stillness of the assemblage, the sculptural art object. And Aunt Jemima was given this subjectivity, right? And you heightening the sense of the object, she became a subject with a voice and goals throughout the poem, no matter how long or short they were. And this also made me think of Vanessa German's work, the shape of her sculptures as well. And thinking about how even though you see them still, you kind of get this vibratory energy. And the poem had that same vibratory energy. And I wanted to know about your experience of that artwork, just as a viewer, as a meditator with art, and then how you moved your emotional, mental experience of that into the text itself, how you reshaped it in the text. And then also the engine is the anaphora. I'm gonna. That's the engine. And so like, did that help you with hearing the poem, with hearing Aunt Jemima, the anaphorism? Like, I'm very, very interested in knowing how you made the thing, made the subjectivity of Aunt Jemima kind of like opened the door for it.
Yeah, thank you. I think sometimes I know I want to write about something, and that might mean that it takes a while. It might mean that I don't know, that it's quick. But this, seeing the piece by Betty Starr, it's just so evocative and provocative that it's like that thing about sticking in the branches. Like, it just hooked me. But I didn't write about it for a long while. And then I feel like the doorway in was to really actually be speaking from Aunt Jemima's, the persona of Aunt Jemima, to the artist. And that was like an interesting way to find some propulsion, because it's really like, in some ways, it's like being able to say, these are my deepest desires, you know? And I found an audience for those desires, which would be this artist who obviously cared enough to make this assemblage. So like, if I'm putting myself in the kind of Aunt Jemima subject position, it's like I'm talking back to this person who cared enough to try to liberate me with these, you know, revolutionary tools. And I want to say, like, these are some of the dreams I have for myself, which I think, you know, I think the artist would dig. Like, I think the artist would understand. And then the repetition and anaphora really helped. Like, I mean, it felt like I could keep going for a very long time, right? It helped me exhaust what my desires are in that persona. Like, this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm also going to do this, and also I'm getting out of this kitchen, and also you know, I'm going to lay down in the sand. And that I don't know, there's some kind of carrying that's happening. And I'm not sure actually when I started to think about that spiritual, but Ain't Gonna Study War No More. Yeah, just the thought, like, what does that mean? I'm gonna lay down by the riverside and I'm gonna rest, you know? And what a deep desire that is for all of us, you know, just to find a place where we can feel vulnerable, where we are desired, where we desire. What does freedom look like? Yeah.
I mean, I think that's like a very I mean, it's a deep question, but I think it's like a question on everybody's minds right now, right? Like, I think that poem is very like appropriate for our political moment, right? Because we're seeing right now all these conflicting stories about what freedom is. And then here is Bluest Nude sitting, you know, like firmly in that moment, giving a hopeful example of what that freedom can be. And having that be attached to rest. But also the skin in the book as well, the putting on of skins, the taking off of skins, the marking of skins. There's an Ursula K. Le Guin's story called The Wife's Story. And through the whole short story, you think that it's about a wife who thinks that her husband's turning into a werewolf. But in the end, you realize it's a wolf who realizes her partner's turning into a man.
Wow.
And I finished reading Bluest Nude, went and read that short story because it brought it to my mind.
Wow.
That these are the kinds of transformations that you are like textually giving to your reader. And I wanted to know the place of the skin in the book, why it's so important, because the core of the book is desire. And the skin seems to, in the experience of putting on, taking off, trading, becoming, transforming is a part of that desire. And I wanted to know more about how they're related.
Yeah. Wow. I guess it is something around touch, because there's something about being, maybe there's something about a definition of freedom as, for one definition, being connected to living a sensual life. And that's surely in the poem we've just been discussing. And certainly there are other examples of what that might mean in the book. But the skin, oh wow. I mean, it is like, it's the portal through which we touch. It's one of the portals through which we have the sensorium of experience that is our living. And it is, in some ways, just thinking about the senses in general, something that you can't really take away from me. Like, you could take a lot of things away from me, but I still might be able to like smell what, a ripe peach smells like. Like, that's, you know what I mean? Like, there's just something that feels about autonomy and about not predicating my liberation on some kind of condition, or like begging somebody for something that they're never going to give me, because they would have ever already gave it to me if they were interested in giving it to me. You know what I mean? And the skin and touch and connection and all of the senses feel like, no matter what, I have that.
So it's also, there is a political through line in the book that touches on like sexual violence, right? Not only the despair of how often it happens, but also the emergency of how normalized it is for so many people. And I think that the combination of your wanting to make strange in combination with the skin, right, kind of forces the reader to give themselves to sensual experience. I think that we treat, at least in culture of the United States, I think we treat the ability to sense like it's something we have to like waylay, right? Like it's a treat, it's a reward, it's not a right. And I wanted, how would you say that may be connected to that like political undercurrent of acknowledging or wrestling with the truth of sexual violence, and then this idea of how we treat sensuality as this waylaid reward for ourselves as like individuals? Because this is what occurs in the Bluest Nude over and over again. The speaker is reaching for this and realizing how immediate it is to reach for the sensual as a liberatory act, while there's this conversation there about the risk of being human and living in a conscious way around one's sexuality.
Yeah, I probably will not give justice to your beautiful question. I think there's just, for me, like what comes up is like, there's just something about the simultaneity of it all. Like, we exist in these bodies that can be sites of pleasure, and I think inevitably are also sites of harm. Like, I don't know if anybody kind of is born and dies without suffering of some kind. And we live in a world in which people who are made to be vulnerable are violated. And we are living with and through and in the wake of that risk, right? And that all of that is true at once. So I think that for sure, if I'm thinking about the naked body, then I have to be thinking about the violation of that body. Like it has to be touched on in the book for sure. And I think it is inevitable. I don't mean that to say intractable, but like, I think we live in a world in which it's hard to imagine an actual promise of safety for our bodies. So yeah, I had to kind of reckon with the simultaneity of all of that. And I mean, the Artemisia Gentileschi, the long kind of experimental poem, she said, the reason why I kind of even was writing about her was, I think the thing that kind of got hooked inside of me was that she had painted the likeness of her rapist onto that painting where he's being beheaded. And I just thought, wow, I mean, what a kind of crystallized gesture for an artist to make. So in real life, this painter was raped. She makes this amazing painting and chooses to portray her rapist as this figure who is being beheaded by this powerful woman. And just that alone, I was like, I've got to read more about her. I've got to look into her work.
We spoke about this for a little bit because I actually taught both Caravaggio's version of the story from the Torah of Judith beheading Holofernes. That's the name of what he calls his version of it. And then Artemisia Gentileschi. I was about to call her Artemisia, like, we know her. We're going to go have tea with her. The 18th century. We're going to go meet Artemisia. But having Artemisia call hers Judith slaying Holofernes, and you sharing that history, because I'd asked my students to compare them. And one of the things that my students said was, no, the blood is realer in hers. Mm-hmm. And because there's this liquid technique in her own, and also her attention to kind of the kinetics of force, there's something that's more real or more complete, whereas Caravaggio's looks very theatrical, very staged. The blood doesn't look very real or, you know, abiding by the laws of physics in any way. Mm-hmm. And we had a small conversation about, well, do you think that's because of her experience? Do you think that's fair to her as an artist to only analyze the technique there via her experience with sexual violence? But the poem, again, just like in the Aunt Jemima poem, and your poem about Artemisia's slaying piece, also just contemporarily like slaying, right? But like clear, but like thinking about how the silences without, because there are several voices here. We have the speaker, we have Artemisia, and then we have Mary Garrard, right? These transcripts are working with these archives. But then these silences, you can kind of tell is the force of the word of someone masculine speaking, but you don't hear, you only hear it like in just so sparsely. It's the least voice there, but the force of it cuts into their story. Then there's the deterioration of the archive that you've managed to preserve. And yet again, despite all of those challenges and her transcript, the difficulty of the content in Mary Garrard's transcript, you still manage to grab the subjectivity of Artemisia and not only mark her by her experience. And I wanted you to talk about that same thing you do with Aunt Jemima, but about Artemisia's archive, what it's like to read that, how you came across it, and then also your personal experience with the work itself.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, she's a amazing artist. Like,
did you see that one where she was like doing that self-portrait, but like in the mirror, like backwards, like just show everybody, like,
yes.
No,
yes, yes. I'm like, I mean, I guess yeah, there's so many things like I mean, I feel like so much of my life is looking for models anywhere really, but looking at her as an artist, as a woman who is making art, like, I mean, amazing, ambitious, like beautiful work, like really serious work. Um, that's just inspiring in and of itself. And that she had this experience, took this person to court, like back in the day. So it was like her dad had to be the one that was actually legally like taking the case, but she ended up um, at the trial, and the way that the footnotes of the transcript of the trial worked in the poem was just like, it was just the perfect voice, because like you're saying, I mean, there's something aggressive and masculine about those footnotes, even though they're footnotes. They're not actually what's being spoken in that rape trial court hearing. But they just provided, kind of basically recontextualized. They provided another way of telling a story that is not really about Artemisia, because it's more about how timeless it is that, you know, vulnerable people, in this case we're talking about women, are sexually violated and not believed. So when she's on trial, she's like saying in the transcript, you know, they're asking all these questions and she's answering the questions and they don't believe her, and why didn't you say this before? And it was like the same time, literally this is happening. Christine Blasey Ford is giving a hearing, and I'm hearing the same things, like literally verbatim over the course of like centuries. And that's when I was just like, wow, if I put all this together and I put a little bit of an eye, a speaker, then it's like, how are all these things like linked? How does violence and power like not change over time, you know?
But I also think that there's a structure to it that, you know, it's the questioning. So it's not even being able to share a narrative of, of harm on one's own terms. You can only share your narrative vis-a-vis the orchestration of the questions that are being asked to you, which creates a situation where the person being questioned is made to be suspect and speculative. And creating that kind of framework, you just kind of wrote toward the conundrum of the competition of narratives when it comes to someone testifying to their own harm. And you left evidence of that while still allowing everybody in the poem that's speaking to, in their earnestness, experience, and honesty, and also the simultaneity, this and similarity you're talking about, kind of act as like a text of proof. The work becomes a kind of evidence.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. A text of proof and evidence, like a recalibration, a collage, writing into the archive, like all of that creativity and power that we do have, right? Like, so even in the midst of violation and harm, even in the things that we can't necessarily control, like that's, again, like why her gesture of painting the likeness is so moving to me. It's the autonomy, it's the control, it's the agency, it's the power. It's like, where in our lives do we have that? And as a poet, this is one place, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So you mentioned research a number of times, and I want to know more about like your research process, or what inspires you to research a particular thing. It's not often, well, no, that's not true. Well, it's not often you actually hear a poet be able to talk to their research process, their own investigations of the world itself.
Yeah.
It's outside of experience, but like, no, I'm going to the archive. We can think of Norbisi Philip and Zong. We can think of Lady Long Soldier, whereas that's research, right? Two recent examples of research. But what's your research process like?
Yeah, I think it's definitely sparked by curiosity. I'm trying to think if there's a good useful example. The first one's coming to mind is about Artemisia, because that's what we're talking about. But I I learned something that is a spark, and then I just keep going down the rabbit hole as long as I as I need to, the glittering rabbit hole. So in that case, like just trying to read around, it's basically like I'm looking for something to stick to me, like I have some curiosity, and maybe it doesn't lead anywhere, but when I have a pretty strong feeling about something, then usually it does eventually lead to a poem. I just have to read and look and observe and study enough to see what um, continues to spark. And that could mean it's mostly that it's following a trail. Like with the Posing Modernity exhibit that Denise Morel curated, there was a huge catalog, with the exhibit. And then there's, of course, a bibliography. So, like I'm always like looking, that's most of my reading is like text from other texts. Like it's just this long, like kind of crumb trail. That's I got to learn Lorraine O'Grady text. That's how I started thinking about like the Black nudes and how they're missing. Then just thinking about what are the contemporary artists that I know that do draw or paint the Black feminine nude, or who are Black women art makers whose work I want to be in conversation with. So even if it's in an epigraph, like I knew McLean Thomas or Carrie Mae Weems needed to be in the book, even if I didn't write a poem about their work, that their voice could be in the book. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really following like, I guess, a scent and and going until I have enough to write.
And then, so Blood of the Air is the chapbook that won the Gourd, like the Chapbook Poetry Prize. Mm-hmm. And some of those poems are a part of the scaffolding of Bluest Nude. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes early writers have the impression that it's like, no, if you do a debut collection, everything has to be new. You can't shuffle the chappy into the book. But then we have these beautiful examples of writers doing this in Bluest Nude. We have it in Nicole Seeley's work, right, as well. Yeah. And many, many more. But can you talk about the journey to the sporing of Bluest Nude from like a kind of, like almost like a polyp, right? Like same reconstituted like biological material of Blood of Air, like fell off as a polyp, and then Bluest Nude grew itself.
You're so great at this. Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways the way that it happened, the way that I explain it is like there was a pile of poems that was Blood of the Air, my chapbook. There were a pile of poems I thought was going to be my first book.
You always think that. We always think that.
And then there was a third pile, which was really, I guess, inspired by this Posing Modernity exhibit and this question of the Black feminine nude. And I was thinking that would be like another book. And then I just put them all down and I just said, what belongs together? What are the poems in Blood of the Air that are really about nakedness, vulnerability, the Black female figure? What are the poems in this middle pile that go with this? And that became the book. Yeah. Which is cool because I still have like that middle stack of poems that I can go back to and like keep sourcing from. Like I like the idea of like a magnet, what's sticking to this? Okay, so that's what this is. And not having to be tied to like, well, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. Like just what's in agreement, what's kind of vibing with each other. And
right. What's increasing that Thelonious Monk kind of inspired, like the minor tones that can go, like a
yeah. And it doesn't
sound.
It could mean that like a really good poem is not in this book. You know what I mean? Like, so it's more about how could I listen to the poems? And I think poems do change based on what's around them. So, you know, you have the poems in Blood of the Air, and then they're reconstituted in Bluest Nude, and they may take on different like shades or light or color or tone based on what's around them, which I love, and I didn't really understand until I was kind of putting the book together that was like possible.
Many years ago when I was at Callaloo at Brown, I remember being in a workshop with Vivi Francis, and she told all of us, you should always read poetry the way that the poet has arranged the poems, and if possible, read from the first book to the most recent, no matter how many it is, because that is a world, especially in a book, the juxtapositions and the transitions that are between poems are a thing that lead to the collectivity of the whole thing. Absolutely. So I think that what you're saying speaks to that, because you're talking about the pressures and that are created through those images.
Yeah, I love that. And it's one of my favorite things to do, to read an author from the first book to their most recent book. It's such a joy to see what are the themes that they return to, how they grow as writers, you know. And I took a workshop with Vivi at Callaloo too. And I remember her saying, don't be afraid to let people see you grow. You know, right. It doesn't have to be like, and this is the perfect manuscript and I'm not going to publish it until it's perfect. Like, it's nice as a reader to see the arc of a poet's, you know, body of work, and to allow people to, you know, be vulnerable enough to be a little messy too.
I love those journals that are focused on works in progress. Like you get multiple, like you may see a poem in a sonnet, and then they'll republish the poem as like a concrete poem later. I love seeing those kinds of transformations because they teach you a lot. So I want to dig a little bit, because we have a mutual friend that let me know that you have studied dance, used to be a choreographer, which alerts me to a connection between a sense of space, the architecture of your poems, the sculpturality of it, as well as the images. And so I wanted to know how your kind of continued experience with movement as an interdisciplinary artist really kind of feeds into your poetry now.
Yeah, thank you. Shout out to Asma.
Shout out to Asma.
Yeah, I always find this question difficult to answer, just because dance has been so much a part of my life. But I do like the idea of choreography and space. I mean, to bring that up, I don't think I've actually ever talked through that with anybody. And it does, just like we were saying, like how when you move things around, it changes it. Yeah. I do feel like making a book, ordering the book, is an act of choreography. And I also think there's something about the skin, the sensuality, the touch, the embodiment, the feeling, that is evidence in the poems, that springs from my own practice as a dancer. I mean, it's hard to separate, because it's like, that's how I live in my life, and that's the body I move through the world, you know? But there's something about space and proximity and distance and order and repetition and breaking patterns that I feel like or poetry, well, music too, and dance have in common.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my last question is more kind of career-based, right? One thing that I often dialogue with young writers about is what the writing life is really like and how it's made to seem, right? And I think we're seeing this right now. We're hearing people who are writing for Hollywood and actors. We're hearing artists that really make the stories that we receive in community, right? May win an Emmy and be working at a construction site, may have written for this awarded show, and then they're working at a grocery store, or you know, they think that the writing life may be like a board game, like it's a system of private prizes, relationships with writers that are kind of network based only, degrees. And I think that with these kinds of pressures, you can be alienated sometimes from the love of the work.
Mm.
How do you stay encouraged, you specifically, in the face of interacting with a less than perfect publication system? How do you stay inspired to continue when you kind of have one of those very wild, kind of gate kept like moments where you're like, is this happening? Like, or, you know, and then like,
Yeah.
what sacrifices have you had to make as an artist, or reroutings have you taken that you can share with us to kind of help young writers who are trying to figure out what this is supposed to look like?
Yeah.
Or to help them break down the illusion of what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah. Illusions aren't great. Not going to help us. I think for me, part of its answer is about just like, what is the purpose? Why do I do what I do? Because if you come up across like a gatekeeping roadblock or a challenge of any sort, I think it's just good to recenter, like, what's a touchstone? So, and everybody has different answers. My answer is I do it to be here on this earth in a way that is like embodied and present and kind, honestly. Like, I feel like my awareness and attention that I have as a poet, which I bring to every day of my life, not just when I'm writing, makes my existence on earth better. Okay, if that's it, then it doesn't actually matter when I come against this gatekeeper or this closed door, because that's another set of values and another kind of universe. Like, I have to be a part of that in some way, but it's just not the center of it all. It's not the why. And so I think getting really rooted in the why is my advice. And that helps me. Like, it helps me when I get rejections. It helps me when things don't go the way that I want. I just think, I mean, why am I doing this? I literally ask myself, like, I talk to myself and I say, why do you write? And then I would say really focus on getting like just financially secure. Like, and that doesn't have to do with writing necessarily. Like, however you need to do that, so that the writing is not contingent on, money. Because I think when we braid those things together, then you're gonna be upset, because we living in this whack ass capitalist world, like.
Absolutely.
So I think finding like freedom in not relying on my poetry to be the sense of like self or money, or that's not it. Yeah, that's not it. That's not what I'm doing this for. Like, and I gotta find other ways to do other things so that I can feel free in this thing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your vulnerability, your generosity. Thank you for your book. It's a beautiful cover. Like I said, when you all order it, when you all experience it, take your time, pour your favorite kind of thing to drink, read each thing 3 times, chew slow. It's gonna fill you up. It's gonna make you cry. And it's gonna bring you back to a more creative sense of yourself with the agency that it enacts. It's a beautiful book. And I'm really grateful to have spoken with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful conversation. Thank you.
All right, are you gonna take us out? Good night, everybody. Oh, we're already done. Hi, everyone in the chat. Okay.
I didn't even see anybody in the chat.